It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
David Harrison here of the Locked On Washington Commanders podcast to share with you that U.S. Cellular has some great news, especially for you, the person listening to this podcast. Right now, you can get one line with unlimited data for just $29.99. So unlike other cell networks, you won't have to pay for lines you don't need just to get that good price. Get one line for $29.99 with unlimited data today. U.S. Cellular, built for us. Terms apply. Visit uscellular.com for details.
What is going on, hockey fans, and welcome back to your source for off-season hockey news and fantasy breakdowns. It's the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, back for a Wednesday episode, and the big chips are starting to fall this summer. Alex DeBrincat, a Detroit Red Wing. What does it mean for the Ottawa Senators? What does it mean for the future of your fantasy squad? And we're going to continue our rewind on the Fantasy Draft 2022. Let's get right to it.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody? Happy hump day and welcome back inside the lab. That is the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. I'm joined, as always, by my esteemed co-host, Mr. Steel Roden. It's your boy, Big Flip Livingstone, on this side of the microphone. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day, even throughout the dog days of this offseason, Steel. There are big news and angles to cover. Just like on today's episode, we missed out on Tuesday, but we're back in a big way today, baby. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Steel, I want to keep this bad boy tight because not only are we talking about Alex DeBrincat, we're going to continue the end of our 5th round draft from the previous draft in our listener league, and there are some big juicy names on the board, and there's a nice little segue here from one of the names the Ottawa Senators are now targeting, Jason Robertson, Kris Letang, and others. But let's start with DeBrincat. There's a lot of angles to cover on this trade, so I want to turn it right over to you. What's your main takeaway here for the winners and losers? I want to toss a trade grade out here. What's your takeaways from this deal?
Well, I think it's a win-win for both sides. The Red Wings acquire Alex DeBrincat, and the Senators acquire Dominik Kubalik, Donovan Sebrango, and a conditional first-round and fourth-round pick in the 2024 draft. So I think it's a win for both sides, obviously, because the Ottawa Senators knew they couldn't re-sign DeBrincat to a long-term deal, and they figured getting the most out of him from a trade would be the best solution out of this situation that DeBrincat has sort of put themselves in. So, on the Detroit Red Wings side of things, Detroit lands a 25-year-old 40-goal scorer in his prime, is from Farmington Hills, Michigan, less than 30-minute drive from Detroit. So this guy is from there. He wants to be there, and that seemed like it was the only destination that he was going to was the Detroit Red Wings. And I think this really does speak volumes to the fantasy value that the Detroit Red Wings now have. The top line looks scary dangerous. Larkin, DeBrincat, and Lucas Raymond. I know there's some things to Lucas Raymond games that he still needs to work on, but so far at 22 years old, he looks great. And just adding another goal, a goal scoring variety on that top line creates another dynamic for the top 6 forward group in Detroit. They still have $8.1 million in cap space. They signed JT Compher, Daniel Sprong. We like Robbie Fabry when he's healthy. So they've got some good forward depth, really good forward depth up there. I believe they're still missing something on the blue line. I do like the addition of Shane Gostisbehere, what he can bring to the second power play unit or even the first one maybe.
I know how you feel about Justin Hull, though.
Yeah, exactly. I think they're still missing something on the blue line to really solidify them defensively. I like James Reimer as a backup goaltender, and like I said, I think everything so far that Steve Yzerman has done has really does speak volumes to the fantasy value on Detroit. And honestly, I could see 5 teams from the Atlantic Division going to the playoffs next year.
Well, there's a lot of different things that just popped up in my head as you were speaking. They're speaking very eloquently, by the way, because the number one thing that I wanted to just spit back at you, the moves that they have made in that bottom 6, I think are going to free up nicely even more that top line. I like the JT Compher ad. Maybe this means a bounce back year from Andrew Kopp. We know maybe now with a decreased role for him, maybe he can have a bounce back year. David Perron, solid veteran. You know that experience is there for those young guys, Raymond, Larkin, and DeBrincat to do their thing. Daniel Sprong, solid bottom six forward. Not talking about a ton of fantasy value here per se, Steele, but I think what it does is bump up the fantasy value of those top three guys that you mentioned right off the jump of your point. So that's number one. Number two, I think this was, yes, a salvage move for Pierre Dorion. He is in moving with no leverage situation. We knew DeBrincat wanted out. That's tough. No way, shape, or form I'm going to argue that he was not dealing from a position of weakness. But the fact that he dealt him in the division and still had to, I know it's just going to hurt this team down the stretch because they're going to see so much of DeBrincat. And I know his hands were tied. I just think that's a really tough thing. And yes, they do kind of make the best of a bad situation. But Detroit wins this deal. I give them like an A or an A plus even. And I'm giving the Sens like maybe a C plus, maybe a B minus. They win the deal for sure. But lastly, I'll turn it back over to you because I want to break down the rest of this fifth round. There's some interesting names on it. My pick was a little bit sketchy. We'll talk about that. What do you think this actually means in the division? Because I don't know if the Detroit Red Wings actually have enough. And lastly, Ville Husso, this is his cage. This team has gotten better. So I think his value goes up as well, Steele.
Well, I think it's close. I think the Detroit Red Wings, like we said with the Ottawa Senators last year, they're 1-2 pieces away. The Ottawa Senators address their goaltending situation. They go out and sign Jonas Korpisalo. Obviously, they didn't get the most out of Cam Talbot and Anton Forsberg last year. Very, very injured goaltenders last season. They were banged up. Ottawa struggled with injuries last year, and something that needed to be addressed was the goaltending situation, and they did that this offseason. Detroit has addressed something they needed this offseason as well, and that's the goal scorer. They go out and get Alex DeBrincat. Sure. They bring a veteran goaltender in James Reimer to back up Ville Husso because, again, like you said, he's the number one guy now. Again, I still think they're missing a few pieces. They've got $8.1 million in cap space to address those situations, which I believe is on the blue line. But for fantasy value-wise, again, like I said, the top six group in Detroit does look pretty deadly. And I do see a ton of talent in different situations for the Detroit Red Wings.
Lastly, about the Ottawa Senators, and it segues very nicely into the draft rewind that we'll do after this break because we're going to talk Vladimir Tarasenko here. I think, is it a bit of a downgrade? Sure. If they do end up bringing in Vladimir Tarasenko, though, Steele, overall, fantasy-wise, you got to really like what that's going to do for that guy's numbers. Do I think it's an upgrade? No, I'm definitely going to DeBrincat all day over Tarasenko if I want building the team moving forward. That's not a bold take. But for the fantasy-wise, I'm going to keep my eye on Tarasenko because he might be able to do some special things. Because also, at the end of the day, we know if there's one thing that this Ottawa team can afford to lose, it's offensive punch because they have a ton of it still.
Yeah, and I'm excited to dive into Tarasenko and where we expect him to land fantasy-wise if he does sign with the Ottawa Senators. But for grade-wise, for the Detroit Red Wings, I'd probably give them an A and A+ for landing Alex DeBrincat. For the Ottawa Senators, I'd probably give them a B with the return they got. You know, two different picks in the 2024 draft. They get Dominik Kubalik, who put up 45 points in 81 games last year. He was a decent pickup every now and again throughout the fantasy year. And it's been a long time coming for the Ottawa Senators. They've been able to sign guys to great long-term contracts under $8.5 million. You know, again, like they've got 5.4 million. So again, like they can go out and sign Tarasenko. I know they've been talking to his camp, so they've got some space right now to go and address those needs. And again, fantasy-wise, if they're able to go and get Tarasenko, that just adds another variety in the offensive group, which is already deadly looking at it right now.
And it definitely makes this trade look a lot better from their perspective if that frees up the money that they're able to then do that. And at the end of the day, the other thing too, you know, they get the term, you know, the label prospect is on this Sebrango kid. He was an outside of a top 10 asset for the Detroit Red Wings on the blue line. The Detroit Red Wings are not exactly loaded with young talent on the blue line, Steele. So if he's projected as an outside 10 prospect, I think prospect might be a bit of a loose term for a guy who played a lot of time in the ECHL last year as well. So I don't know how much he's really going to affect anything for this Ottawa Senators system. But at the end of the day, The time will tell, my friends. After the break, we're going to continue our Fantasy Draft 2022 rewind from our Listener League. Speaking of which, Steele, our Listener League coming up this year for this year's season, it's going to be bigger and better than ever, and I'm coming for you this year, Steele, because I got a lot of respect to make up after I kind of sullied my name a little bit with my poor performance anyway. My friends, today's episode is brought to you by our number one summer swag folks from Bird Dogs. Steele is absolutely loving the swag. He's got a couple extra orders coming in. He's got the shirts. He's got the shorts. I actually gave them to my father-in-law, Steele. He's wearing them on the course every single week, and the big guy is looking good. So make sure you're checking out the stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you that truly sculpted look. Trust me, fellas, you want to be checking out Bird Dog shorts. They're doing the exact same things as Lulu's for the ladies, but for the boys. They fit way better. They fixed the issue of inventing the cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but it stretches to give you that slimmer fit. So you got to be heading over to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL. Enter promo code LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or promo code LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti style tumbler. You want to take your Bird Dogs off ever. We promise you.
There's no off-season for the true NHL fan, and there are no off days for Locked On NHL. This off-season, Locked On NHL has you taken care of. In just 30 minutes every day, Locked On NHL will give you the latest on all the fireworks of the NHL off-season. Locked On NHL, free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. We are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you can find your favorite team from all four major sports leagues, including the NCAA, your team every single day. Make sure you hit that subscribe, hit the follow button on your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate all that love and support. And thank you so much for tuning in all summer long to the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast with your boy Flip Livingstone and Steele Roden, continuing the 2022 draft rewind.
Yes, sir.
In the fifth round, starting, or I guess not starting, but in the middle right now.
Yeah, starting today
with Vladimir Tarasenko, 54th overall pick in the fifth round.
Yeah.
I'll throw it over to you because this is a guy we were just talking about him. Maybe it's rumored that he could be signing with the Ottawa Senators. That seems to be the most likely situation right now after the DeBrincat trade. They've been talking to each other with each other's camps and everything. So I'll throw it over to you. Where do you think Tarasenko lands next season's draft?
Yeah, in terms of like where it was for this, I think it was still a bit too early to take Tarasenko, in my opinion, even though I love a lot about his game and he's earned a respect as just one of the true OG snipers of the last decade or so, especially in the Russian realm. But he's fading a little bit, Steele. The steps losing it a bit. The hands are still money. And I think he definitely still brings some value, but I'm talking at the more back end of the draft. So I'm looking, he was here in the middle of the fifth. I'm saying you have to wait till maybe the 8th, 9th, 10th, even later for Tarasenko, depending on the format. I just don't see it for him as much this year. But again, if he starts playing top power play minutes in Ottawa and he starts going off with the likes of Giroux, Norris, obviously Timmy Stutz and others, that's a whole other caveat. But I think his value has got to be, in terms of this draft, he's got to be falling down the board this year.
That is, and I couldn't agree with you more actually on this. I like this player a lot. I think as well the fifth round is too high. I actually drafted him in my Keeper Dynasty Fantasy League in the 7th round, and looking back at it now, I still think that's a little bit too high. So I'm agreeing with you there. I think 8th, mid to late 8th round, early 9th round is exactly where Vladimir Tarasenko should fall. Coming off a 50-point, 69-game season, 170 shots, 36 blocks, 75 hits. There's still fantasy value to be had. I think 65 points is still in reach for this guy. Like you said, his hands are still money. If he signs with Ottawa, he's playing with a ton of talent up there, both on the blue line and on the forward group, obviously. So depending on where he signs, I think that's exactly where Vladimir Tarasenko falls, somewhere in the 8th or 9th round. Moving forward to your draft pick, though, Patrik Laine, 53rd overall in our fantasy hockey draft. probably the most unluckiest skilled player in the NHL right now. Like, this guy gets more 2 to 3 week injury diagnoses than anybody I've ever seen in the NHL. Triceps, ankle, elbow, oblique, wrist. The list just goes on. But the crazy thing is, when he's playing, he's practically a point per game player. He had 52 points in 55 this year. 56 points in 56 games the year prior to that. His 80 at 71.5. I think the 7th or 8th round again for Patrik Laine is more deserving. So 53 was obviously a little bit high, but that's only because of the injuries. If there's no injuries, he might even get drafted higher.
I was drinking the Kool-Aid, and I really do love Boone Jenner and Johnny Gaudreau. Say what you will about him overall in terms of what he brings to the all-around game and the quality to the success of the Columbus Blue Jackets. He puts up points, and you need sometimes some guys in your lineup to balance out offensively. And Boone Jenner was also hurt. Johnny Gaudreau had some growing pains. Still, I believe, finished with 70-plus points without looking that up. But anyway, I was drinking the Kool-Aid a bit on that line, and it just was not able to stay together because when they actually put up points with the best of them in terms of top lines in the NHL. Now, you mentioned the injuries, and I'm going to move on from Laine very quickly. That's it with this player now because we know he can get it done when he's in the lineup. So you have to be maybe even more wary, Steele. I reached for sure. I think where you mentioned is much more reasonable, 7th, 8th round, or maybe even later because of that injury factor. But for me, he's still a very draftable player.
He is. Very.
You know what'll happen? He'll stay healthy for like 4 months and put up 60 points, and you'll be cheesed that you didn't draft him. He's just that good offensively, and that trio is very good together.
It is very good together. Same as this next trio and this next player. Jason Robertson falls in at 52nd overall in our fantasy hockey draft. Obviously, it's the same round as Tage Thompson. It's the same sort of story. Both of these players and Jason Robertson including will most likely be going in the 2nd round of the fantasy hockey draft. I don't think they're quite there in the 1st round. There's still a few better players above them. I actually traded Nathan McKinnon for Jason Robertson and a 1st round pick this past season. And I thought, at the time it was a good trade because McKinnon was injured. I still think it's a good trade about where this kid's heading. And Robertson, Heiskanen, and Ottinger, they are the future of the Dallas Stars. I think you could throw Rupe Hintz in there as well, but those three are really the 1-2-3 combo that gets Dallas going every single game. Robertson gets better and better every single year, 109 points in his 3rd season in the NHL. Like I said, early 2nd round draft pick.
Most definitely. And I think even for our draft this year, the 5th round was too late. And we're a victim. I could have taken him and actually I couldn't have. But anyway, but you know what I'm saying? We were victims of even maybe letting him slide ourselves. After an 80 point, was it 80 points? I thought I saw 80. 79 points the season before. Yeah. And now he puts up almost 110 piece. And I wanted to also throw this out there in terms of maybe don't sleep on the players on this list. He was the 13th overall in Hart voting the year before when he did score the 79 point steal. And this is what I mean by don't overlook it. I look back at some of these Hart Trophy lists. Maybe just don't miss the first 13 to 14 players on this list because the Hart Trophy that year, Matthews, McDavid, Shesterkin, Gaudreau, Josie, Kaprizov, Makar, Draisaitl, Ovi, Barkov, Robertson, and Matthew Tkachuk. So maybe just go to that list.
Pretty good
and
list.
If there's any players, if there's any players still on that list, jump on them right away and take them. I'm just throwing out a little bit of a funny caveat because I saw that. But at the end of the day, Jason Robertson, absolute stud. You mentioned the trio, and I'd also put Wyatt Johnson in the mix for that young future as well. Bang.
Might be a couple years away from that to get to Jason Robertson level.
I'm hyped for that kid.
I am hyped as well. He had a great playoff run. And to me, it's very funny that Jason Robertson and Tage Thompson fall in the same round of our fantasy hockey draft, and they're both skyrocketing up into the 2nd round for next year's fantasy hockey league. Most likely the ADP will probably be the 1st pick in the 2nd round for both those two guys.
Depending on how deep the draft is still, maybe like 12 or 14 man draft, they might be going 1st round.
Possibly so, yeah. If it's a big fantasy hockey league, 14, 15 deep team, I could see them going in the 1st round as well. we are going to be moving forward. We got a couple of defensemen up next. Kris Letang, Alex Pietrangelo, and then finishing off with your boy Sebastian Aho from the Carolina Hurricanes. All three players coming up next. But this episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. With the 2023 summer in full swing, now is the time to take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right, just $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under and who you think is going to hit the first home run of the game. All on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball.
After a lackluster debut, Victor Wembanyama showed out in his second game in the NBA Summer League.
Victor is Victor. He's going to cook on his own time.
The Detroit Red Wings have acquired Alex DeBrincat from the Ottawa Senators.
This completely changes the outlook of not only the offseason, but of this upcoming season.
And with the first pick in the 2023 MLB Draft, the Pittsburgh Pirates select Paul Skeens.
The kid is potentially a generational prospect.
For more on all these stories, check out new episodes of Locked On Spurs, Locked On Red Wings, and Locked On Pirates. Then listen to Locked On's new series, Paving the Way. Each episode highlights a different voice from around the network. A Locked On host whose journey in the industry has helped pave the way toward creating a more inclusive and diverse media landscape. That's Paving the Way, presented by State Farm, available now on the Locked On Presents podcast feed.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Please hammer that subscribe, hammer that follow button. We appreciate all the love and support you show us every single morning, 7 o'clock, Monday through Fridays, when you can find all of our episodes all summer long, continuing the conversation of your fantasy draft rewind of 2022, what you can expect from these players in 2023-2024 season. Next up, from the Pittsburgh Penguins, Kris Letang, 51st overall flip. I'll throw it over to you because this guy is just an ageless wonder at this point in the NHL.
Just one of those players, Steele, that you almost want to root for, even if he's on the team that your favorite team is playing against. You know, he had the health issues. He's, dealt with a lot of on and off ice issues and still just really put up basically Norris level seasons year in and year out. He's been very close a number of times. 6th in 2011, 9th in Norris voting a year later, 3rd a year later, 8th, 4th, 6th, 9th, and 7th. This guy is always in the top 10. He's very consistent, and I'm actually not ready to write off his fantasy value just yet either, Steele. He just proves to be such a gamer. And I know he's 35, and I know there's a lot of mileage on this guy after 17 years in the NHL, especially because
36.
of the Yeah. Oh, man, you know me with the birthdays. Thank you for checking me on that. But 17 years in the NHL and also a lot of success for this Pittsburgh Penguins team and a lot of deep cup runs. That's a lot of ice time on this body. But I'm thinking I'm liking taking a risk on Kris Letang as maybe like my last defenseman drafted even, Steele. Like I'm thinking maybe a 9th, 10th round, take a shot on Kris Letang. Because say what you will about the overall quality of the Pittsburgh Penguins, I'll throw this take at you and leave it to you. I actually didn't even hate some of the moves that Kyle Dubas made. I think the team is better. Tristan Jarry is a bona fide top 10 goalie in fantasy, in my opinion. And I think Nola Chari in the bottom mix now, Riley Smith on the wing, another year with Jake Gensel and Sid. They can put up points. They had Lars Eller up the middle as well. This team got better. So I like that for the fantasy pieces, including Letang.
We are very much on the same page today. I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. I don't think 51st overall is too far off from where this player should land. It is too high, but it's not far off. And again, obviously his age and his injuries play a factor into his value. He's played a heavy game his entire career and continues to do so up until now. Averages 25 minutes every single season for the last 13 years. This past year, 64 games, had 41 points, but he's still, the peripheral stats are incredible. 161 shots, 108 blocks, 162 hits. And again, that's just amazing. Sensational for a 36-year-old defenseman who has suffered multiple strokes in his life. So much so. Incredible story. Incredible story, the battle that this player's had to go through. I actually, again, with Vladimir Tarasenko, this is another player that I drafted in my other fantasy league. I drafted him in the 6th round. Again, a little bit high. I couldn't agree with you more. I think 9th, 10th round is exactly where Kris Letang should be falling right now.
Love that. And honestly, speaking of dealing with off-ice hardships, Alex Pietrangelo, the next guy in this draft rewind steal, dealing with some himself. And I'm going to say that, of course, with the Cup, but even before the Cup, the best season Pietrangelo has ever had. And a career-high tying 54 points, 11 goals, 43 assists, and, of course, the peripherals, 177 block shots, 65 hits, chips in with the 16 PIMs, which is actually low for him, considering how nasty of a game we know he likes to play. I'm still going to say that 5th round, it seems high to draft a guy like Pietrangelo, but it actually panned out for banger fourth-line bangers because of how good of a year Pietrangelo did end up having, Steele.
You did have a very good season. Yeah,
still too high.
Best season as well. I think he falls right there with Kris Letang, actually, in the same category. Yep. I think 50th overall is too high, but not far off from where I believe his fantasy value is. Like you said, 54 points in 73 games. He has those peripheral stats, exactly the same sort of stats like Kris Letang has. They also finished very similar at the end of the season in fantasy points. So again, 9th, 10th round is exactly where I think both Kris Letang and Alex Pietrangelo should be falling.
And depending on the league, that's going to fluctuate. We're talking about referencing our league, the number of GMs. So all of these, estimates, guesstimates, predictions are going to fluctuate by a couple of rounds or two at least, depending on the format of your league. So just always keep that in mind. And especially here with both of these D-men, depending on how many you're able to take and depending on how many squads are out there, you might have to bump their value up a little bit, actually, Steele, considering that they are going to bring such good peripherals. And you're only allowed to add, a few D-men, and there's a ton of people in your draft. You're going to have to probably slide those two up a little bit, but be careful. And also, speaking of being careful, I think what happened to Sebastian Aho last year, and maybe a little bit of a down produce, in terms of his points, you better be careful on not thinking that might happen again, because I think he's still one of the best young pieces out there, Steele. I really like Sebastian Aho a lot.
He is good. And, I was contemplating, I was going back and forth. I was like, was he taken too low? Was he taken too high? Because I was trying to figure out if 49th overall was a good spot, or if someone reached, if they, let him fade a little bit.
Yeah, what's your take?
I think 3rd round is more fitting for Sebastian Aho. I think it's very close. Again, like you said, the year prior, he had 81 points in 79 games. Again, I think it was a very different season for Carolina, trying to figure out if they were still a fantastic team, but trying to figure out things differently offensively. The points weren't completely off, but 66 was just a little bit of a down year.
Still a good year. I have high expectations.
Exactly, high expectations, and 25 years old, going to be 26. At the end of July, so he's getting right into his prime now. He's on a very good team.
Yep.
I think third round is more fitting for Sebastian Aho. Maybe he goes a little bit higher than the 5th round.
Sorry, it's my bad. I was like, are you still going there? My bad. When I thought about this too, because at the end of the day, I wanted to say this, looking at his shot totals from last year, 218 shots, 221 shots the year before. I got to say, shoot that biscuit, baby. He's got to shoot the puck way more. He's got an underrated release and a really sneaky good shot. He's got a good hockey IQ, and I really, really like his game. And obviously, he's also, I think, fallen victim to some big injuries at major points to the season. Am I copping out a bit for a player that's got to be the guy now in Carolina at 26? 20, holy Steele, you know me with the birthdays. 25 years old currently, 26 coming up. he's got to take that load too much, right? He's had to shoulder maybe too much offensive pressure. So let's see what a healthy year of Carolina forwards means. Maybe they're not done tinkering. I expect a big bounce back year from Aho is what I'm making my really long explanation long. 520 career NHL game steal, 468 points in the regular season. And I just wanted to bring up his playoff numbers because I know he's been a stud. 58 points in 62 career games, also getting it done in the postseason.
He is a very strong forward and very strong fantasy hockey player for any fantasy hockey team out there. So, yeah, I think third round is more fitting. I think he fell a little
third or
bit.
Fourth.
I think third or fourth is more fitting for Sebastian Aho. There are a few players out there, that will get above him, but has a ton of fantasy hockey value, like the Carolina Hurricanes. We'll have to continue this conversation for next episodes. Thank you so much for tuning into the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, making it your first listen every single day. Make sure you're tuning in Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning Eastern time is when you can find all of our episodes. And thank you again so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your summer bets out there. And we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Peace.
After a lackluster debut, Victor Wembanyama showed out in his second game in the NBA Summer League.
Victor is Victor. He's going to cook on his own time.
The Detroit Red Wings have acquired Alex DeBrincat from the Ottawa Senators.
This completely changes the outlook of not only the offseason, but of this upcoming season.
And with the first pick in the 2023 MLB Draft, the Pittsburgh Pirates select Paul Skeens.
The kid is potentially a generational prospect.
For more on all these stories, check out new episodes of Locked On Spurs, Locked On Red Wings, and Locked On Pirates. Then listen to Locked On's new series, Paving the Way. Each episode highlights a different voice from around the network. A Locked On host whose journey in the industry has helped pave the way toward creating a more inclusive and diverse media landscape. That's Paving the Way, presented by State Farm, available now on the Locked On Presents podcast feed.